In a small, isolated village, there was an old house, always dark and lifeless, that the villagers feared deeply. It was known as the House of the Sealed Windows, because despite its Gothic architecture and large windows, no one could see what happened inside. The windows were blocked with thick boards, and those brave enough to approach claimed to see strange figures moving in the darkness. One cold October night, a young man named Andrew arrived in the village, determined to investigate the mystery of the house. He had heard stories of people who entered and never returned. A strange thrill drove him to uncover the truth. He couldn't resist. After speaking to a few locals, who, with fear in their eyes, begged him to stay away, he found an elderly woman named Clara, who finally agreed to tell him the house's dark secret. Clara told him that years ago, a man named Jasper had lived there with his family. Jasper was a window craftsman, famous for his detailed work. But over time, the villagers began noticing strange things about him. He became quiet, avoided everyone, and his eyes held an eerie gleam, as if he were possessed. One night, he locked himself in his house, and no one saw him or his family again. Eventually, a neighbor went inside to check, but fled in horror. In a fit of madness, Jasper had nailed the windows shut from the inside, and each one held bits of cloth, hair, and even fingernails from his family members, as if they had been sealed to keep something or someone trapped inside. Ignoring the warnings, Andrew decided he would explore the house that same night. Past midnight, with only a flashlight and some tools, he forced his way in and began wandering through the dark, cold halls. The air inside was thick, and there was a metallic smell, like rusted iron. He reached a room where the windows were indeed sealed with boards, just as he'd heard, and each one had something disturbingly strange. Dark stains and scratch marks covered the glass, as if someone had tried to escape from inside. Then, he began hearing a faint whisper that seemed to come from everywhere, yet from nowhere specific. The whisper called his name, soft but insistent. Andrew felt compelled to approach one of the windows, and against his better judgment, slid his hand over the boards. As he touched the surface, an icy chill ran up his arm, and in that moment he saw his own face, reflected in the glass. But his reflection had hollow, empty eyes, as if his soul were trapped in that image. Suddenly, a gust of wind slammed the door shut behind him with a loud bang, and his flashlight started flickering. The whisper grew louder, and Andrew felt something watching him from every corner of the room. When the light finally went out completely, he felt a weight on his chest, as though hundreds of invisible hands were pushing him against the wall, pulling him toward the glass. With his last breath, Andrew screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the silence of the house. Days later, the villagers found his flashlight on the floor of that room, along with a small trace of blood on one of the windows. No one ever saw Andrew again, but rumors say that if you approach the house on a cold night and to listen carefully, you might see his face reflected in one of the windows, his eyes hollow, and his mouth open in an eternal scream. Since then, they say the house still waits for its next victim, for anyone daring enough to peer through those sealed windows.